Good morning, thank you. Normally, little things happen and I would just let it pass, but I have to comment because it's kind of important. My phone went off during the meditation, an unforgivable sin for a minister to leave their phone turned on during the meditation. However, I'm only bringing it up because to show you an example of how spirit is kind of interconnected. The call, it turns out, was from the security company at one of the properties that I manage 24/7, just sort of like being a minister, it's 24/7.
Yes.
And the objection that they were bringing to my attention was the fact that somebody had garbage on their lawn that hadn't been picked up. I only bring that up because it's gonna come back, okay? Just plant that seed, be aware, okay? Spirit is very interconnected.
Very
Just
smart.
if you pay attention during the, if
Synchronicity,
you
that's
pay
what I
attention
thought.
during the talk, you get extra points if you laugh at the right time. So, the title for today's talk is Pacing Item, and as you know, I come up with these unusual titles for no
know.
particular reason. And where that term comes from is in the manufacturing world, and if you manufacture complicated items like aircraft or space rockets, that you know that there are millions of individual components that have to come together in a predetermined order to put that thing together and make it complete. All around the world, raw materials are built up into sub-assemblies and then shipped to a final assembly facility to create the airplane or the rocket or whatever. It's not all made under one roof. Pieces come from everywhere. The one module that is behind schedule becomes the pacing item for the entire project.
The one module.
The one sub-assembly, the one item that is not hitting the assembly line at the right time is going to slow down the entire project or bring it to a stop.
Stop. Okay.
For example, if one engine bolt is missing from the engine assembly being prepared somewhere in the world, that engine doesn't ship. It doesn't ship, it doesn't arrive on time, its spot on the assembly line lies vacant, and as all the other pieces move, that engine has to go into place. It's not there, the assembly line essentially stops. This one item, and this one bolt in this case, is pacing the entire project. Until that bolt shows up, nothing else can happen.
Okay.
So there have always been people more spiritually aware than others. We see that every day. And it's not a recent development that people are becoming spiritually aware. There have always been spiritually aware people. As far back as written history, we see the examples of the Greek philosophers, and that's really the most far back the written record goes. But probably even before that, there were people that laid around the campfire at night and looked at the stars and thought of more important things, or let's say bigger things than just, are we going to live through tonight? Okay. So there have always been these people that are spiritually aware, and that each of us is in our own place on our spiritual awakening path has also always been true. Some people look at the stars and wonder, and some people look at the stars and say, I can't see the stars, it's cloudy, and I panic over that, because they know the weather's going to turn bad or whatever. So more and more people, however, in the last century, I like to think, have become more and more aware. The pace is really accelerating toward our spiritual evolution. More and more people are becoming aware. You don't have to just come to these rooms, these classes, these lessons to find people that are like that. If you watch movies, if you watch television shows, if you listen to popular music on the radio or however you get it nowadays, the spiritual message is there.
Yeah.
The message of love is everywhere. You've heard me say before, I love to watch my horsey movies, and I look at John Wayne and I see things through my adult eyes that I never saw as a child. It's not just about the gunfight at the end, it's about the relationships
Yeah.
all throughout the story. And those movies are 70 years old now.
Yeah.
So if they were doing it 70 years ago, I like to think they were doing it 170 years ago.
Yeah.
And you see it in novels and things that exist from farther back as well. So we've always been getting there a little bit at a time. But those that are not experiencing this awareness, this spiritual development, are falling farther and farther behind. What I'm referring to is the common consciousness, that total of all knowledge that we are all a part of. And if you go back 5,000 years, 100,000 years, it was pretty much about survival. And again, there were those handful that looked at the stars and said, I wonder what that's about. But the envelope of awareness has been growing and changing and evolving through time. And in the last century or two, the pace of evolution has increased. And yet there are still people who really only think about themselves. What's in it for me? How can I prosper? How am I going to survive? Let's face it, if you're living on the street, where the next meal is coming from is probably the most important thing you're thinking about. Along with how do I keep what little I have,
Right.
because it was so hard coming to me. For me, in the 3rd grade, I experienced a period of prolonged illness, and I missed a lot of school. And it turns out that the 3rd grade is a really important time in education. It's kind of a time where you go from playing with crayons and blocks to actually learning things that become the building blocks of everything that follows. And shockingly, school was not suspended when in my absence. So when I entered the 4th grade, I wasn't up to par with my peers. They knew things that I didn't know. And unfortunately, in the education system of my growing up, it never really occurred to anybody that it was that important that the 3rd grade had been missed, or so much of it had been missed. And so I was allowed to move forward with my class, and don't worry, it turns out it has a happy ending. But not only was I unable to spell words that my peers took for granted, my peers took no end of delight in my inability to match their skills. So not only was I not able to do the things they were doing, they loved to make fun of me every time I did something that wasn't up to their standards. Kids are like that. Don't we just love them?
Yeah.
Like someone who's lost their employment and then leaned on their credit cards to get by. I was falling deeper and deeper into a downward spiraling path of failure. Every time I made a mistake, it was reinforced publicly. And therefore, my desire to put myself out there withdrew. Why would I put myself out there just to be ridiculed? And I became less and less involved with the activities going on around me. Regardless of our acceptance, the common consciousness moves forward. In our technological times, we see, again, all these movies, all these songs, all these stories that really have that message over and over again. Love people the way they are, accept people the way they are. Be the best you can be, but don't beat up on the people that aren't making it. What do they say? Be nice to the people you meet on the way up, because you're going to meet them again on the way down. You know, that's a very important lesson. Always keep in mind that just because I'm doing well doesn't mean everybody has to do as well to be just as important. So for me, well, as the unenlightened fall farther and farther behind, and they're unable to catch up, they begin to get bitter and defensive. Because even though they're not on the wave, though they're not riding that awakening wave like everyone around them is, or seems to be, they don't understand that they're the ones that need to change. That the universe is just waiting for them to catch up. And the universe isn't judging them. We do. We ridicule people who aren't on par with us.
Yeah.
The universe couldn't care less. The universe is fine just the way it is. And just the way we are. But inside, people recognize I'm not the same as those around me. So they get defensive about it, and defense becomes fear and anger. And it finds ways to build community around itself. It finds other people who aren't keeping up. And they form clubs. They have meetings. And they get together and say, it's just us against all of them. The world is against us. There are these conspiracies or whatever. And it takes a million forms. I'm not trying to define a fine line here. Just, it happens. So for me, in the 3rd or the 4th grade, and it wasn't just in the 4th grade, it actually took the 5th, the 6th, the 7th grade before things began to realign. And for me, the saving grace came really from an English course, and I guess it was a standard, probably 7th or 8th grade English course in the LA school district at the time, where we were focusing on writing. And thankfully, for me, I had a teacher who was really only interested in what I wrote. Couldn't care less about how the words were spelled. Yes, the paper would come back and there would be a line through the word, but it didn't affect the grade. So the stories I wrote came back with A's on the top. Even though there were marks showing me where I had made errors, the story was fine. The general presentation was fine. The teacher would say, you can always get help fixing the structure. I want to know how you feel and what you experienced. Just get it down on paper. We can fix it later. Her attitude relieved me of the burden of being behind and put me back on par with my peers, because I could tell a story as well as any of them, as long as I didn't have to spell it right.
Yeah.
I always say I was born in the right era. Spell check came along just in time. Because I couldn't have done what I've done in my life without it. I really couldn't, because it was a tool that I could employ, saved me hours of time with the dictionary. Now, I want to say that that wasn't the only item that gave me that permission. You see, my father, who had to quit school in the 8th grade because his father passed away, and they were a farming family, and you either worked the farm or you didn't live. And he had a younger brother and sister who had to be supported as well as his mother, who did her best as well, but in the time, we're talking back in the 1920s, So his relationship with school wasn't what you'd call fantastic, even though he had probably been a pretty good student. But in my early days, before the 3rd grade, he came into the class one day because the teacher had sent a note home, apparently, saying that I was being a little bit unruly in a way that was unusual in his mind, because I'm left-handed. And the teaching of the time was that every paper had to look identical, whether you were left-handed or right-handed. So if you were a left-handed person, the teacher would come along and twist your paper on the desk in such a way that you were literally writing almost upside down, so that the letters would slant the same way as everybody else's. My father took off from work, and I really had no idea this was happening. It was just one of those things. And he came in, and he literally put his hand on the paper, twisted it back the way it was natural for me, and told the teacher in no uncertain terms, "I don't care which way the letters slant. Let him write.
Wow,
Just let him write."
wow.
The teacher, of course, didn't know what to make of that. And, you know, that memory exists in my head. I can't even see it, I just know it happened. It was that far back in my life that I don't really physically have, you know, a videotaped memory of it. It's just one of those nebulous things that I know it happened, you know. And again, that made a big difference because it said that there was support in my life for my creativity above the mechanics of how it got done. And then one final example, I survived the 12th grade and I went on to college, and I had a chemistry professor who focused on the formulas that we use in figuring out chemical stuff. I didn't go on to be a chemist, so I don't really have a lot of memory of that. But I loved it because these formulas were really complicated. I mean, if you see chemical formulas, they can be 3 or 4 lines of stuff going on. And he'd always say, "I'm only going to look at your formula. I don't care if your arithmetic is right or not." He says, in the real world, not only will you check your arithmetic 15 times before you ever turn it over to your peers for review, your peers are going to review your arithmetic. You will never publish an arithmetic error. But if your formula is wrong, you're going to blow something up. So get the formula right. And that gave me permission to focus on my creativity. Just get the formula right. You can fix the other stuff. And the last piece of information he gave us that was very, very valuable to me was in acquiring information we don't need. And he threw his head back and he looked and he goes, "You see that periodic table up on the wall?" It was a chem lab. You know the table that has all the letters and the numbers in it?
Yeah.
He goes, "There's going to be one of those in every lab you ever work in. There is one of those in every science classroom in this school. That table is readily available to you. Do not waste your time memorizing it. You can just look at it. As long as you know that that number is that and that letter is that, trust me, you'll learn the ones you need to know, and the rest you just need to know where to look it up."
Right.
I thought, what a great concept. Just know where to look it up and we're good. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to waste your time on minutia
Yeah.
when you can be creating a cure for cancer or,
Right.
you know, a non-toxic paint or whatever. But you don't have to worry about that stuff. I thought, what a great idea. So again, permission to focus on what I bring to the table as opposed to what's already on it. Let's start moving forward. Let's quit worrying about what's behind us. That stuff is part of the record. We can look it up. Our lives don't come with a manual, but it does seem to come with an awful lot of rules. However, most of those rules are made up by human beings. The litany of traditional religions are empowered by their volumes of rules. What foods you can eat, when you can eat them, what you should wear, how you should wear your hair. Society kind of reinforces these rules. It's fun to look at the movies that were made back in the 70s and 80s and see what we considered stylish at the time and how unique it looks today.
Oh, yeah.
So governments came along and used the religions and the rules of the religions to codify their own power. Started passing laws that reflected pretty much what a lot of the religions were saying. Now, not to say some of it's good stuff. Some of it stands up to spiritual times. After all, we all agree it's a good idea to not steal from other people. We all agree it's not a good idea to go around killing people willy-nilly.
Right.
That's spiritual. That's a spiritual principle. Those are the kinds of things that stand the test of time, that we don't do that stuff because we know it's not a loving thing to do. Science of mind throws away those rule books and instructs us that the one mind exists only to create, and leaves up to us with our freedom of choice to create from our own beliefs. But it does not matter how well our own yard is maintained. The street is still full of garbage, and stuff flies in and litters our well-manicured world. Did you catch the tie-in?
Yep.
Yeah.
The joyous principles that are the science of mind are only beginning to filter into the mainstream of common consciousness. As I said, this last century has seen much more rapid, widespread dissemination of our beliefs simply because we have the technology to do so. The pacing item is the uninformed belief residue that resists acceptance of this evolved thinking. Those falling behind the curve of spiritual evolution feel their power slipping away and unable to admit their error or sin, the act of missing the mark. They become embittered and fight harder and harder to maintain control. When you have very little power, you tend to want to hang on to it, as opposed to saying, maybe there's something here I need to look at. So let's have a simple test on whether or not your belief system is working for you or working for the world in general. So here's a simple test, a few items, a few questions you can ask. Do your beliefs require the enactment of legislation to be enforced? Do your beliefs require gerrymandering of voting districts to empower a minority view? Do your beliefs require active voter suppression to ensure victory for your cause? Do your beliefs require dissemination of misinformation to fool people into believing lies? Do your beliefs require imprisoning or executing anyone who might question your belief or authority? Do your beliefs value some persons above others? Do your beliefs condemn dissenters to hell? If the answer to any of the above is yes, those beliefs are pacing items, stalling our evolution, and deserve serious reconsideration. Holmes writes in Living the Science of Mind, and I'm sorry, this is a long quote, but it all ties. Limitation is not a thing itself, it is a way of belief. Unhappiness, happiness is a condition, but it is not something of itself. Every man has an identity in spirit. Every person has an identity in spirit, and this idea will eternally unfold. It will never grow less, but will always be more of itself. What man what people know about God, the universal truth, constitutes our real spiritual being, constitutes our personification of the infinite. Therefore, the more completely conscious we are of God, spirit, truth, beauty, the more perfectly we are evolved. Our spiritual awakening is deeply personal. Each of us is on our own place in that path of evolution. Most of us enjoy life in the middle of the bell curve of experiences, firmly embedded in the common consciousness. Some thrive on the outer fringes, either as social Neanderthals, or like us, who embrace the science of mind teaching on the cutting edge of spiritual evolution. The universe provides space for all of us and empowers each of us to define our own understanding. There exists a future where humanity evolves into a spiritual form undefinable by what we know today. Its revelation awaits the awakening of the last holdout, the spiritual pacing item needed to make our process complete. We cannot legislate awakening. We cannot cheat our way to revelation. We cannot eliminate those who resist, because that would be counter to spiritual principle. We have to love each and every one right where they are and embrace them as they are, or we are out of alignment with principle. None of us will be living when the final stone is turned, but all of us will be there when it happens. Thank you.